The way I think this is going to go down in 2024. So we've got two possibilities on inflation, right? Either the consensus is correct and inflation keeps going down, or I'm correct and it goes up. Let's just discount the consensus for the purpose of my analysis. And let's say I'm right. Inflation goes up from here.
Peter Schiff discusses the potential scenarios for inflation in 2024. He suggests that while the consensus expects inflation to decrease, he believes it could go up. If his prediction is correct, Schiff outlines two possible actions by the Federal Reserve. Either admit they were wrong about expecting lower inflation and raise interest rates, or maintain the promised rate cuts despite rising inflation. Schiff speculates that Powell, being politically motivated in an election year, is unlikely to retract the promised rate cuts, as it could harm Biden's chances of re-election. He emphasizes the potential market turmoil if the Fed reneges on its commitments, likening it to a massive withdrawal from a promised economic stimulus, leading to a market crash. Overall, Schiff hints at the precarious state of the U.S. economy and the delicate balance the Fed faces in managing inflation and market expectations. With that, let's dive into the video to hear his full thesis.
There are two things that the Fed can do in the face of that changing economic data. Powell could come out and say, we expected lower inflation, and it was based on those expectations that in my December meeting, we said that we were going to cut rates, and we indicated that rate cuts were coming, and the dot plots indicated rate cuts. But that's when we were under the impression that inflation was coming down. But now that we're faced with a different reality, now that we see inflation heading higher, we're going to have to take those rate cuts off the table. And in fact, we're going to be raising rates some more. And so we thought that 5.25, 5.5 was going to be the peak. Now we don't know. Rates might have to go quite a bit higher because it's clear that we didn't quite kill inflation yet. It's come back and we have to fight harder, right? That's one thing that Powell can do. Now, I don't expect him to do that. I certainly don't expect him to do that in an election year, because if he does that in an election year, he destroys any chance that Biden has of getting reelected. Now, I don't even think he has that great a chance, but the only chance he has is if the Fed helps. And given that Trump is not likely to reappoint Powell, and Powell knows this, I think he's going to be a team player, and he is not going to take away what he has giveth to the markets and to the Biden administration. In fact, if the Fed rather, really was willing to take away the rate cuts if inflation picked up, they never would have promised them. They would have stayed tough, which is the way they were just in the prior meeting, in the November meeting, right? 6 weeks earlier. Powell said, we're not even thinking about rate cuts. We're not talking about it. We're not thinking about it, right? We're going to stay the course. 6 weeks later, that's all they're talking about is rate cuts. So what changed? Well, I think politics changed. I think the Biden people had a talk with Powell, and that's what happened. But since they did that pivot, there's no way they're going to pivot again. That would be a destruction. The markets have already priced in all these rate cuts. How are you going to take those cuts away? I mean, you're going to precipitate a crash if the markets don't get that. It's like they've been promised this drug, and they're already high. I mean, they basically consumed the drug. How are you going to suck it out of their system without this massive withdrawal?
In the continuation, Peter Schiff discusses the Fed's predicament regarding promised rate cuts and potential inflationary pressures. He argues that Powell, in committing to rate cuts, has limited flexibility to change course if inflation worsens. Schiff explores the possibility of Powell tightening policy, but deems it unlikely due to the economic ramifications. Instead, he anticipates Powell downplaying rising inflation, introducing new terms like transitory, and maintaining commitment to rate cuts. Schiff doubts the Fed will abandon cuts or raise rates, speculating a probable return to quantitative easing despite worsening inflation, further fueling economic challenges. Schiff's analysis hints at a complex and potentially concerning path for the U.S. economy in the near future.
So if Powell really was going to be data dependent and abort these cuts, if the inflation numbers turned around, he never, ever would have indicated that rates were coming down, because that puts him in a bind. If he had never promised these cuts, it would have been a lot easier for him, to do nothing. You can't promise the market something and then not deliver on those promises when they're built in to the market. Now, what Powell could have done is just said nothing and just surprised the markets with some positive statements on rates later in 2024 after getting more data on inflation. But he didn't do that. He had to preempt that. And one of the reasons for that, I think, was the bond yields were up at 5% on the 10-year to the 30-year. It was already a big problem, and they couldn't wait. Powell needed to do something to stop interest rates from rising, to stop mortgage rates from rising. And so he had to do this. He had to come out and pivot. He had to tell the markets, we're done. We're going to start cutting. This is what brought the rates down. This is what brought mortgage rates down. They're still too high. I mean, people still can't afford to buy these houses, even though rates have come down, because they're not back down in the threes. That's where they need to be. We built a housing market on 3% mortgages. So 6% mortgages don't work. Maybe it's not 7 anymore, wherever it got to, but it's still too high given the current price. And there's still too much debt. Even though rates have come down, they haven't come down nearly enough. So that scenario where inflation gets worse and the Fed reacts to it by pivoting and tightening policy, I discount that. I mean, is it possible? Yes, but I would assign a low probability to that happening. What I think is far more likely is that the inflation numbers get worse and Powell ignores it, rationalizes it, comes up with a new word for transitory. I don't know what, I don't know if he wants to dust off transitory again, but he might have to come up with a different word that's similar to transitory, because he's going to have to dismiss it. He's going to have to state that these numbers are just temporary. You got to give it time. You got to let the monetary policy work. It works with a lag. I mean, I think he's going to come up with all sorts of excuses to not disappoint the markets and take away what he has promised with respect to rate cuts. Now, is it possible that higher inflation might slow down the cuts a bit? Maybe we won't get as many cuts, potentially. I don't think the cuts are going to be taken off the table, and I don't think we're going to get any rate hikes. In fact, what I do think we're going to get is a return to quantitative easing, even though inflation is getting worse. And that is really going to light a fire under inflation, right? It's already a fire, but it's going to, throw more, logs onto it.
In today's discussion, Peter Schiff presented a compelling analysis of the potential scenarios for inflation in 2024 and the Federal Reserve's dilemma. He explored the possibilities of rate cuts, rate hikes, and the impact on the economy. If you found this breakdown insightful, don't forget to subscribe for more in-depth financial analyses. Hit the like button if you enjoyed the content, and be sure to share your thoughts in the comments section below.